Good evening, everybody. My name is Kathleen Boshears, and I work in the Institutional Advancement Department with Hannah, and I have been helping her out with a few of the web series events. So tonight, very excited to have Kevin Chalut, one of our 2020 Distinguished Alumni Award recipients, on the phone with us. The evening is a lot earlier than normal because it's 10:30 for him, so that's why we changed the time for this particular event. As I mentioned last week, we did have a in-person Distinguished Alumni Award ceremony scheduled in Albion in April. However, that has been postponed to April 16th, 2021. So mark that on your calendars so that we can celebrate in person with everybody, hopefully. We thought that the web series would be a nice way for a broad audience of our alums to get to hear and talk to our Distinguished Alumni Award winners. So a few things before we start. Many of you have already been on these in the past, but we will be recording the event this evening so that those that couldn't attend will be able to watch it at their leisure. Hannah will be muting everybody so that we are able to hear Kevin and Amy very clearly. And then in the end, she'll unmute us so that we can have a roundtable discussion. But in the meantime, if you have questions for Kevin throughout the episode, go ahead and put it in the chat, and we will make sure that we ask those questions during the evening so that we can ensure everybody has a chance to talk to him. So without further ado, I will pass it on to Amy.
Great, thank you, Kathleen. My name's Amy Everhart Perry. I graduated from Albion in 2008, and I've worked at the college now for a little over 6 years. I work in institutional advancement, and part of my role includes the absolute pleasure of getting to work with our alumni board. And the members of the alumni board select the recipients of the Distinguished and Young Alumni Awards, excuse me. And the criteria for the awards, the Young Alumni Awards is 10 years out from Albion or less. And the Distinguished Alumni Award is recognizing those of our alumni that have had remarkable careers and also contributed significantly to humanity and to their communities. And so selection for these awards includes, kind of the best and the brightest, and I'm sure we all know that Albion graduates in general are the best and the brightest, but these are the best of the best of the best, and the people that we just look up to so much for the work that they're doing, and selecting people that we know will be role models for all of us, including our students. And I'm so thrilled to see that we have some students on the line tonight. I think that will add just some real fun to our time together tonight. So a little later, if we have time at the end, I'll talk a bit about if you know someone that you would like to nominate for the Distinguished or Young Alumni Awards, how you can do that, or if you are interested in possibly serving on the alumni board, what that might look like. But first, we are here for the main event, which is to hear from Distinguished Alumni Award recipient Kevin Chalut, who graduated in 1999. And some of you might have gotten a chance to see his video online, and if you didn't, I encourage you to check it out after the call. So without further ado, we have a couple questions that we'll just be doing kind of discussion style between me and Kevin, and then from there we'll open up the floor. So starting off, Kevin, can you tell us a bit about the work that you do?
Yeah, so I, as some of you may know, I'm a physicist by training, but I've somehow found my way into stem cell biology, and I work here at the Cambridge Stem Cell Institute at the University of Cambridge. I'm first of all, I should really say that, thanks a lot for inviting me to give this call. I mean, this is really great. It's like a blast from the past to be able to talk to people from Albion too. So, and yeah, basically I work on stem cells and trying to understand, why and how stem cells do what they do. So I'll just start by saying, what exactly a stem cell is. They're the cells that they sit in our organs, and they can sort of replenish lost or damaged cells. And obviously they're very important for functioning organs. And stem cells, in fact, support growth and development, and they can make distinct cells in each organ, and they maintain all of our organs throughout our lifespan. So they're extremely important in that sense. But it's interesting because stem cells, what originally got me interested is that stem cells actually have a very simple choice to make at a particular point in time. They can give rise to a copy of themselves to make more stem cells, or they can make a new cell, tissue devoted cell. Yet throughout this very, very simple choice, even though it's this very simple thing that they do, they give rise to this incredible complexity. The question is that there's a decision to be made there. Do they give rise to a copy of themselves, or do they give rise to a new cell? And the question is, how do they make this crucial decision? And really nobody knows that, even though it's at the heart of regeneration of tissue and maintenance of tissue and organs. So this decision is actually a dynamic process, and we know now that there's some distinct checkpoints within that decision. And the decision that's made is a function of three things. One is cell history, the history of the cell, time, and signaling, the sort of chemical signals or mechanical signals that exist within the environment. So those three things. The cell history is sort of about the identity of a cell. What is this cell? And that's biology. And actually biology has really done this well. Like, you can look at the genome of the cell and look at exactly what the identity is. That tells you about the cell history. That's been pretty well mapped out. But the other two things, time and signaling, are things that we don't know a whole lot about. They're intrinsically very dynamic. And that's where physics comes in. And that's where mathematics and better ideas of how to quantify and model things, that's where that comes in. And that's what I've been trying to, that's how I've been trying to fit into an understanding of stem cells, is this idea of dynamics. And so in fact, I want to try to understand two things about stem cells. One of them is that when stem cells actually make this decision, there's a decision that's made there. There's a point in time that they actually make it, a sort of tipping point, if you want, where it basically decides whether it's going to be A or B. What exactly is it at that point? What is its identity? Is it more like A? Is it more like B? Is it a superposition between these two things? Is it chaotic? Is it ordered? The other thing is that in terms of signaling, many people have been looking at chemical signaling over all the years, but something that I've been particularly interested in is mechanical signaling, the microenvironment that a cell sits in, the sort of how stiff it is, how soft it is, what type of connectors or polymers are sitting where the stem cell is to help it make these decisions. And we know now that this is an essential determinant of the decisions that a stem cell makes, but we don't understand it. And so we're trying to understand how that works. And in the process, we're doing things like trying to study stem cells from particular organs. We're particularly interested in liver, trying to learn how to control them better with that idea of the microenvironment and the signaling of it, and how exactly they make these decisions in time. And the hope there, and what we've been trying to do, is figure out things like how can we regenerate livers, or perhaps even make new livers. And that's the kind of thing that we're doing quite a bit of in the lab, by trying to better understand how to control the mechanics and to better understand how exactly stem cells are making the decisions that they make, the dynamical decisions. So that's a lot, I guess, but you asked, so there you go.
And I see Ron Lessard, he's president of the Alumni Board currently. He said, I think this is more of a question for right now, so I want to make sure we didn't miss it. He said, do you look at this point in the stem cell as being in a transition state?
Yeah, basically. We can do a lot of things now. There's unbelievable progress that's going on in terms of biology, in terms of the techniques that we can use now. We can use things like sequencing, where you can see you can get a cell and you can know exactly what genes are being expressed, or even what proteins are being expressed at any particular point in time. And we figured out ways through various different techniques to try to grab cells exactly when they're in that sort of tipping point, and try to see exactly what they look like and what they look like on the other side, on either side of it, to try to understand exactly what that state is. And so, yeah, it is, and so far preliminarily, it does look quite a bit like a, some kind of transition state, but we have a lot to learn there still.
Ron had a follow-up question. He said, can T-cells influence the direction?
Not that I know of. I think that stem cells are, there seems to be quite a good separation between, stem cells and the immune system. I mean, I'm sure that there's some co-regulation, or there's some ways that they influence one another. But I think by and large, this is something that, sort of evolutionarily, we've kind of separated these compartments. You don't really want the immune system to be massively affecting regeneration and vice versa. Although one could imagine that they're coupled together and that they influence one another in some important ways. But I think there's an attempt to keep them separated.
So Kevin, you currently, you lead a team, an interdisciplinary team of researchers at the Cambridge Stem Cell Institute at Cambridge University. Can you talk a bit about how you got there from start point of Albion College student to the work that you're doing now?
Yeah, so try to cover 20 years of history and in what, 30 seconds or less? Okay, so when I left Albion, I went on to, I mean, in fact, when I went to Albion, I didn't know that I was going to do physics at all. And in fact, John Williams, who's on the phone call, and Dave Seeley had a lot to do with influencing me to start taking physics to begin with. But as soon as I started taking physics, I loved it. I loved the discipline. I loved the way that it made you think about the world, that that you're always trying to reduce systems into its simplest form and model them in a way that might have broader relevance. And there's a lot of things that I just loved about physics. And so I went off to graduate school to study physics at Duke University. And I thought that I was going to do theoretical physics, like the cutting edge string theory or something like this. But it turned out that I really wasn't nearly smart enough to do that. So that was a good realization for me, to realize that, well, what I thought I was going to do was not for me at all. And I found my way into experimental physics, and in fact, laser physics. But it was still pure physics. But at that point, I had a family in Durham, and I didn't really know that I wanted to be a scientist. And I thought, well, maybe I should do some postdoctoral work. But I didn't really know if I wanted to go into academia or anything like that. So it was kind of like, well, I'm not moving a family across the country or across the world to do a postdoc when I don't know if this is really what I want to do. So I essentially went, at Duke, door to door, and basically said, okay, is there anybody who wants to give me a postdoc? Because I mean, there was nobody obvious to go to, and I knew I needed to stay, for family reasons. And so there was one guy who I actually had known a little bit in graduate school, and he said, well, sure, with your expertise, you can come aboard, but we work in cancer. They applied optical techniques, which is kind of what I've been doing to cancer, and trying to identify early cancer states. And it wasn't long before I found this collaborator in stem cells to apply some of those techniques. And as soon as I kind of got this idea of, wait, this is an incredibly dynamic system, and we can really start to think of this in terms of physics, in terms of trying to understand, how the interplay between these various factors. And from there, this was 2008. The economy had crashed. I was looking for a faculty job, but like all the faculty jobs closed, and I applied for exactly one postdoc, which would have been a second postdoc. I wanted a faculty position. But I applied for exactly one, which was at the University of Cambridge in England. It was completely random. It looked interesting. And I applied, and, I didn't get any of the faculty jobs, but I got the second postdoc, which was in Cambridge. And we said, well, what the heck, leave the US and try the UK for a couple of years. But just everything really, really took off at Cambridge. It's such a lively intellectual environment, and it's really just kind of an amazing place to think about bigger questions. And there's been so many great thinkers and it's just such an amazing intellectual environment, you know, and I really loved it here. And I think I just sort of took off, and it was very fostered this kind of multidisciplinary kind of stuff that I love doing. And then, you know, I got a Royal Society Research Fellowship to start a lab, and that was back in 2010, I guess. And so I've just been working ever since then, building up a lab, asking the questions. You know, the Royal Society gave me 8 years and quite a bit of money, and they said, just ask whatever questions you want to ask, we'll support you. And that's what I did, and it just was, I guess, successful enough that nobody's fired me yet. So.
In your video, you said that your advice to students would be just, you know, not to be so overwhelmed with all the possible things, but to do the best that they can with what's right in front of them, and that things will kind of go from there. Do you have any further thoughts along those lines, or words of wisdom to share with students that might be on the call?
Well, it's really just that, you know, I think that there's my personal feeling, and I guess everybody might say this differently, but I think these, that it doesn't, I never really had a whole lot of success thinking about, you know, what exactly do I want to do and moving in that direction. Because I spent a lot of time not really knowing what I wanted to do. And I really just, you know, and I got this advice at some point, and I must have been ready to hear it, but it was basically, you know, somebody told me, somebody who was, you know, close to me basically said, you know, why do you spend all this time worrying about what you're good at or what you can do? Just whatever it is you're doing now, just do it well, you know, do it as the best you possibly can. And then, you know, the next steps will become clear. And that's that advice has done very well for me. And I think it probably would do well for a lot of people. You know, it just isn't something, I think your future is not something that you can really kind of fix or, you know, game theory that well, to be honest.
So before our plans changed dramatically this year, you were originally scheduled to be our keynote speaker for the Elkin Isaac Student Research Symposium. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on the impact of undergraduate research opportunities.
Well, so Dave Seeley, you know, when you know, he was the first physics lecturer I had, and you know, he was the one that really turned me on to physics. You know, he told me after my first year, you know, because it was the first physics courses I'd ever taken. He said, I think you should come and, you know, to Toledo with me, to the University of Toledo, and do this undergraduate research experience. I didn't even really know much about physics at that time, but he said, well, you need to go and have this experience. And I went into this lab, and I honestly never had any idea what I was doing. And I don't think, I'm pretty sure that I didn't advance that lab's goals in any way, shape, or form. I probably was just, you know, getting in the way most of the time. But for me, just the opportunity to be there and seeing people working and, you know, spending all their time like, okay, here's our question, and, you know, here's how we're going to try to set up this experiment to answer this question, was really, you know, kind of enlightening to me, because I thought, oh, okay, so this is like how science is actually done. You know, you can learn this in textbooks, or you can learn about things in textbooks, but at the end of the day, it's a lot of like, okay, you know, spending time trying to make things work. And I thought, okay, that you know, that's great. You know, I really like this idea. Ask a question and get some resources to try to figure out how to make it work. And I think that's just something that, you know, you have to see for yourself. And that's what you can see in these undergraduate research experiences. It's not really about doing great science, because, you know, that takes a lot of training before I think you can do that. It's about just getting that experience. I mean, it's just really, for me, it was really eye-opening.
Thank you. Do you have any thoughts to share with us about how you think that your experience at Albion or the people that you met during your time as a student prepared you for the successes that you've had in your career?
Yeah, I think that, you know, I like to think of myself as a very, you know, multidisciplinary thinker. You know, I really, you know, I'd say my lab really kind of straddles physics and math. I mean, we are a biology lab actually, but we really straddle these disciplines. And, this is something that I really try to convey in everything that I do, trying to think, kind of multilaterally about things. And I think that Albion absolutely was an integral part of that. I mean, I took, I did literature, philosophy, religious studies, math, sciences. I mean, just so many different things. And at some level realized that, using different parts of your brain and, becoming comfortable and just putting all that together and being around people at Albion who are all that way too, people who are just curious about many, many things and, just excited about many things. And, I think it was just an inspiring experience. I might have said, I don't know if if it made it the final cut of the interview. I didn't watch the video, but, I lived at the Goodrich Club and, that was just such a great thing because it was just a bunch of us there who were all like, just kind of in some sense, like really intellectually curious people who were always just like, having a good mix of like, having fun, but also like really talking about, well, at least at the time, what we thought were very deep things. Whether they actually were, I don't know. And just being around people like that and just being in so many different disciplines, it just, yeah, as I said, it truly, I think, helped me to become a very multilateral thinker.
I've seen a couple questions come through on the chat before we get to the questions that other people have submitted. And those of you that have a question burning and haven't asked it yet, feel free to go ahead and put that in the chat. But before we get to those, are there any final thoughts that you have for us?
No, I hope that we can all get together and celebrate in person in April, next April. Let's hope it works. I really, yeah, I mean, I would love to come back to Albion and visit again. It's been a long time, and Albion means just, an unbelievable, I can't say how much, I can't really put into words how much Albion really meant to me. And, time has only done more to make me realize how much it meant to me and my growth, as a scientist, fine, but really as a person, I think it was just a wonderful experience. So any way that I can reconnect and come back, it just, as I said, it's, I would love that.
Awesome, thank you. One question that we have is, I think this was back when you were addressing Ron's question about, I don't know, it was back earlier, so I'm trying to get myself mentally back to there. But Kevin Oppel asks, have you seen the reverse using your newly won knowledge to advance physics? For example, does this balance point for a stem cell help us understand quantum physics and Heisenberg principle of indeterminacy? Sorry, I found that. And he said, no laughing if this is a silly question. I was a history poli-sci guy.
Well, I'm certainly not laughing at the question. I think it's a good question. I'm not sure that I can answer it though. I mean, I think it's if studying biological systems, the thing is that physics, there's laws in physics. Physics is done almost too good of a job of like coming up with the basic laws of nature. And physics deals in laws and theories, and that's what you need. You want to try to find ways to explain the natural world. Biology is suffering from a lack of that kind of rigor. They don't have it. Basically, you have evolution, and that's it. There's nothing else in biology. There's no laws. There's no theories. It's really just a bit of a hodgepodge. There's no, fundamental. It's really lacking in these kinds of fundamental principles. Which is what makes it exciting in many ways. But it also means that there's very few things that have been, I think, yet discovered in a solid way in biology that you can take back to physics and say, okay, well, this is really helping us to understand physics better. It may happen, but right now it's hard to see the pathway there, because if we could see that, then I think we'd probably have a lot greater understanding of biology and, and how it works. And in fact, it's really quite there's a lot that's not understood in biology.
Martha O'Kennan says, Kevin, you're doing great. Are you still able to keep up your guitar playing?
Hi, Martha. Sometimes, not as much as I should. It's not. I periodically I'll play it every day for hours at a time, but then whatever, uh, something happens and I put it down for a long time. I should play more.
And Nicole Zellner, professor of physics here at Albion, says that research freedom sounds amazing. I hope you are still able to scratch that academic itch by supervising students or postdocs or chair department, LOL.
I don't want to chair a department, that's for sure. I supervise a lot of students and postdocs. I love teaching, but I definitely think that I do best in a research setting, and at administrative settings I haven't quite haven't quite got there yet. Maybe one day.
Deborah Seeley says, thank you for the story of Dave from the Seeley family, Deb and Matt.
No, you're welcome. Yeah. Thank you for joining the phone call.
And David Ryman, also a professor here at Albion, says, hi, Kevin, what is the mix of theory versus experiment in your lab group?
Well, we do, it varies. Right now, I only have about 2 people doing theory in my lab and most people doing experiments, but I'd like to expand that. And there used to be quite a few more doing theory. I think that we got to a point where we needed a lot more experimental insight, and now we need to sort of backtrack, I think, and try to set some of the theory up. There was just too much that we didn't understand, and we needed some experimental input. So I'd like to start expanding the theory a bit more, but right now it's not as much as I'd like it to be.
And he has a follow-up question. Do you do any computational research?
Yeah, well, that's kind of what I was saying. It's basically the same answer as what I gave before. I mean, I think of this as being, I'm thinking of it more as physical theory or physical modeling, and that's the kind of computation we'd like to do. And yeah, we do. There's 2 people working on it, but I'd like to expand that. It should be more than what it is right now.
Well, thank you so much, Kevin. We're getting close to our time here. And so I think it's time for us to wrap it up officially. But those of you that want to stay on the line and just have a casual conversation with Kevin are welcome to do so. So let's give a round of applause for Kevin and congratulate him on his award. So thank you so much, Kevin.
Oh, thank you.
And my final last words for you all are, if you would like to nominate someone for a Distinguished or Young Alumni Award, you can email, putting an email address in the chat here, alumniengagement@albion.edu, and I will reply to you directly and talk to you about that process. We're really looking for professional accomplishments and contributions to community and humanity, and then examples of that. And I would be happy to talk to you in more detail about what the elements of that nomination looks like. And then, oh, and Hannah's got a screenshot for me here. And then our alumni board, well, actually, sorry, Distinguished Alumni Award nominations are due end of October. And then our alumni board members serve 3-year terms. They're staggered 3-year terms with an option to continue for a 2nd consecutive term. And nominations open up, they'll be open in December or January, and they'll be due in March. And then our current alumni board will select new members in April. And involvement with the alumni board includes the selection of our alumni award recipients, and generally speaking, alumni and student engagement, which includes a lot of things, including homecoming and supporting our current students through professional networking, and professional coaching. So you're welcome to email me directly or that alumni engagement at albion.edu if any of you have interest in either of those things. So with that, I will pass it over to Kathleen to wrap us up officially for the call tonight.
Great, thank you, Amy. So as we wrap up the evening, I wanted to let you know that our next web series event will be on September 9th, and that will be back at 7:30, and Hannah will be hosting. We're going to be kicking off our year of inauguration web series events. So once a month throughout the academic year, President Johnson is going to host a member of our Albion community for conversations and events that will explore his 3 pillars of his campaign, which are public purpose, belonging, and action. We're going to start the series with Keeping Albion Residential, the current student experience from Wesley Hall. So considering the students will have been back on campus for a few weeks, it's kind of nice to be able to host this. It will consist of conversations with President Johnson and senior resident assistants of Wesley Hall, Antonio Nelson and Rachel Goldner, who will share their experience as upperclassmen leaders welcoming first-year students to campus. So that should be a great event. So we hope you can join us for that and see what the current world climate looks like. So as Amy said, Kevin, thank you so much for joining us. It was a great session. And this concludes our program. However, if you want to stay on for a little bit, I know some of you may want to speak with Kevin in a casual conversation. So thanks, everybody.
Everyone should have permission to unmute themselves now. So if you have a question, go ahead and do that.
This is Kevin, the other Kevin.